And we're live with our 192nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another holiday episode of Absolute AppSec. Ken and I are both wearing our celebratory Log4Shell sweaters in memoriam of the time that everyone spent last year talking about Log4j. And now it just doesn't matter anymore. So, remember that for the next branded vulnerability that comes out, right? We got quite a bit to talk about today. First and foremost, though, from a reminder perspective, Ken and I will be at CactusCon the end of January. We're doing a workshop. It'll be a limited version of the secure code review. Mainly, we'll just be tearing apart different code bases, whatever people want to work on. We'll have some people going around. We'll be implementing the process, but we won't be diving quite as far into the technical details about the secure code review process. Otherwise, we have quite a few calls for trainings that we've submitted to over the last few weeks. For the spring, I know there's been some interest in us getting back over to Europe as well. That is going to happen. We've got a lot of big announcements that will be coming the start of the year as far as different training opportunities in different places. It's just a matter of us getting them on the calendar, and we'll start to notify the community once we have those in front of us. Otherwise, I know we will be back at KernelCon as well, right? Like that's a pretty solid yes for us. But yeah, Ken, is there anything else that you've got on your radar that you wanted to jump into first off?
No. I think the new year will bring some interesting changes, as you know, which I'll tease now, but not discuss too much into. But yeah, the new year is going to bring some interesting changes, and there's more to report on that shortly. But in the meantime, I think you've covered it all. Are we talking about DEF CON yet or no? Actually, I don't know.
No, they haven't said anything yet, right? We taught at DEF CON this last year. There's going to be other opportunities coming up once we know exactly what those are and they're being tweeted out and they're formal, then we'll start letting people know.
I did want to mention, sorry, the reason I also mentioned that things are coming next year is that's why I've been so quiet on Slack. I apologize, folks who are participating in Slack. Our Slack has been awesome. There's been a lot of chatter and stuff going on. Not just, I say chatter, it's actually useful links, useful information, useful questions and answers. It's been awesome. I haven't been participating as much, and it'll all be evident soon as to why. But anyways, just want to say it's really cool to see all the activity in there. And if you're not in our Slack, you should definitely hop in our Slack, and also use it as a resource to ask questions. We do have a jobs channel if you want to, post jobs there as well. And I think the other thing too is this year we're going to be okay with correct me if I'm wrong here, Seth, but we're going to be more open to corporate sponsors and things like that. And lastly, I guess the other thing to mention is that we do have 3 guests scheduled in the new year already, confirmed dates and everything like that. So you probably see that already all staged up on our YouTube channel. So anyways, not to spend too much time on all this promotion stuff, but a lot of information to get out. We haven't been on the air much last month. So yeah, good times.
Yeah. But if you or your company is interested in sponsoring the podcast, please reach out to us. Just info@absoluteappsec.com. Otherwise, right, you talk about the Slack channel. Maybe we can start there. Cole had a great article that he's been posted. I know he's been asking for feedback on blog posts and how to actually start that process. And I know you and I have kind of been through this in the past. Obviously, we do the podcast nowadays, we've got the blog that's associated with it that we pop stuff up on once in a while, but it's not a regular thing. Maybe it should be. Maybe it'll start to be next year. That's still in the works. But if I were to ask you, right, what is it that you look for in a security blog? And we'll post Cole's blog up here shortly. But what is it that you look for, or what would you be trying to achieve in a blog, I guess? Yeah. Let's start there.
Well, actually, I think what Cole mentioned in his, I don't know, like maybe the first couple of paragraphs is pretty spot on. Like he said he was looking for content on GoLang Security, and that what he found was marketing hype, right? Like check your dependencies. I mean, people always seem to care a lot about dependencies. Not to say they shouldn't, but that's usually what it is. Like input validation and dependencies and all the same stuff that you hear from like every talk or OWASP conversation from here to. And anyways, whatever. So I think that's what I'm looking for is what he's going for here, which is not just have generic information, but he said specifically he was looking for GoLang security information, and that's all he found. So in here he gives us some like pretty specific language specific tools, and then like why you would use those. What again specifically could go wrong in like error handling, like what is practically been seen by him. And anyways, I just think that non-generic, pretty useful and highly specific information is what we should be going for here. So by the way, there was a question here on how can we get those Log4Shell sweaters. I will say Robert Reichel, who is actually on the GitHub Red team, was the creator of these sweaters. I will ask him if there's going to be a second run, but
yes,
it was a limited time run, so I don't know is the answer.
it was at the height of Log4j, and he decided to put it together. So if you saw it then, it was great, or you were able to pick one up. I'm not sure if it's still available. Well, yeah, if you ask him though, that'd be good. Yeah, I mean, as far as like blogging goes, right? I do like, you see this quite often, right? Like on security blogs or like security consulting or marketing blogs or whatever it is. It's the generic content, is specifically what you and Cole are talking about, right? That it doesn't actually answer any questions, or it's just a rehash of somebody else's talk or what everybody else is actually going through. And I don't want to discount the usefulness of some of that, right? If you've never come across any of the instructions for GoLang security or whatever else it is. But I know personally, I have a tendency to skip those pretty quick. Because when I'm looking for content, just like Cole, just like you do when you're performing some sort of a code review or you're doing an assessment, I want deep level, or I want like specific advice as to how security is implemented in those languages. And so I'm going to start digging in for very specific items. So I posted the blog up there. I mean, this one specifically is on GoLang security, right? And he wants to go further, like deeper into like, defer statements. I mean, actual like programming constructs that are used, as opposed to just like validate the inputs, right? I mean, we all know that we have to validate input. That's a core belief of the OWASP top 10, I guess I should say, or a core value of the OWASP top 10, whatever, right? But those language specific blogs and blog posts are money, right? Like when it really comes down to it. And this is part of the reason that last episode I was starting to push that dev.to as well, Ken, because I was seeing more and more of that sort of advice there. What used to be practical dev, but now is dev.to, just articles for developers on how to do different things, right?
I've been reading those recently, actually, on just like a lot of things, which but yeah, some of it's more about system tracing and things like that, some fun stuff. But anyways, there's a lot of helpful articles on there for sure. And this is the thing, man, like you have kind of two routes that you can go. I mean, well, there's probably more than that, but two that pop up in my mind. So one is review a bunch of applications that are written and then like the same language and framework, and then you get to become the expert because you see enough patterns and how things are written, and then you get to kind of point out the anti-patterns. And frankly, that's kind of what I did with Ruby on Rails, right? Like it's what a few of us did.
Yeah.
We just looked at like enough application code that was written in Ruby and Rails to be able to say, hey, here's what people typically do, and here's where things typically go wrong. So that's one way, is just review a ton of different applications all built on the same stuff, and you get to know what the anti-patterns are, as well as patterns. The other way is to actually read someone else who's done all that and just posted it. And that's pretty much what Cole's doing, and that's what I look for personally. I mean, there's obviously other stuff as well, but when we're talking about like language and framework specific security things, that's exactly what I want to see. So it's pretty dope. I know he talked about defer statements, he talked about exception handling, and there's going to be a series of things, and that's just kind of where he's starting. So
yeah, no, it's nobody uses Go fuzzing.
Yeah. Is that
you're right?
Is it Go Fuzz or Go Fuzzing? Is that what he said?
Yeah, like I mean, there's there's automated testing. There's fuzzing support in the standard Go tool chain, and there's a section that he goes into here, right? And like, if I look into fuzzing in most applications, it just doesn't exist, right? But that it's funny that he calls that out. It's towards the end of the article, right before he wraps things up, right? Is that most GoLang code bases he reviews use the standard unit testing library, but haven't adopted property-based fuzzing yet. And I know this is one, and I mean, this is something that Stefan Logical and I harp on all the time too, is that we have fuzzing libraries that have been built out, but we very rarely use that, especially in the like the web or the app space, as opposed to like maybe we do that more on C libraries or large, like, places like Apache or Mozilla, right? Like with Firefox and other things, that they have their libraries that are their fuzzing pipelines for actually fuzzing different inputs and everything when it comes to, releasing products. But we just don't do that in general in applications. For some reason, we've just never gotten to that point. But I liked that call out. Sorry. I'm just going off apparently today, Ken. That's all.
No. I mean, it's a good point.
Yeah. Well, and so the thing about fuzzing and using those sorts of just like throwing everything at a specific library or specific function is that it shows you ways that the application that can fail that are unexpected. Right? You're looking for edge cases, and a lot of the testing that we do as developers is functional testing, where we're just looking for, does it do what I intended, right? And a lot of the security problems that exist are out there because we don't think about the edge cases, right? Like we don't think about, we get our functionality working, the business case is solved, and we move on, as opposed to actually looking at it holistically, even when we do the threat model, right? Like we're very set in our ways, which is the reason doing this property-based fuzz testing will throw the kitchen sink at any function, at any library or any input, and see what falls out, right? And it may not result in an RCE, but at the very least, it's going to show us how resilient our code is to unexpected things. Yeah. And now I'm going off. I'm sure we could get Logical in to speak about it as well. But it's a good call out there. But I think from a security perspective, especially the AppSec side of things, it's a place that we need to start moving in order to identify those vulnerabilities sooner in the pipeline, right? There was that most recent ping vulnerability that came out this last week that's been in there for 24 years, right? Did you see that one, Ken?
No, I didn't see that at all.
Oh, you didn't. Let me pull that up. I think that's what it is. Yep. Somebody fuzzed ping, and this is why I just started thinking about it when it came up.
What's ping written in? Is that C or what is that?
Yeah. It's C. Yep. 1983. Right. Here you go. Here's the blog post about it.
Jesus. That's more than 24 years, brother. That's almost 40.
That's older than I am. Yeah. But
that's not older than you are. That's sorry. All right. All right. We'll be easy on that today. It's the holidays.
Come on, man.
Why are you so mean? Anyways, all right.
But yeah.
Right.
So
Mature face.
I mean,
all right.
It's your face. Yeah, exactly. So, right, like he ran just AFL fuzz against, so he built test.c to do ping, right? And ran it against ping and it crashes, right? So it wasn't even, if you look at the code that he put together there, it's very simple, right? It's basically just creating a file, with a certain amount of content in it and calling ping using that file, right? And it crashes.
Interesting.
And yeah, which
that is a pretty trivial buffer overflow. I'm like, I'm not a overflow expert by any means, and this, even to me, it's like pretty obvious right away what we're looking at here.
Yep.
Wow.
And it has to do with this PR pack library, right? And and so like after it crashed in, just against ping itself, he was looking at the library specifically and, figuring out what was going on in order to create the actual exploit or the actual, the bug against it, right? To find out where it was exactly in the code. But that's one that's lived for, 20, how many years? I guess he says 24 because they actually replaced that library in 19. He calls it out somewhere, right? Like, they rewrote 2019, citing alignment problems. But yeah, that PR pack, apparently 24 years was when it was actually in place. But
yeah,
and this is it, right? Like if you have time to actually go after some of these older utilities, this older code that's out there that we still depend on, I'm sure that there's more of this that exists. And it's mainly because we've changed technologies, platforms, like the core computing principles stay the same, but we have changed frameworks. We've changed languages. We've stepped back, we've stepped out, right? Like it's just like the level of abstraction has gone up and it's gotten more and more complex, which we didn't always intend, or the developers didn't always intend these tools to be in place, in 30 years, in 40 years, even though we still depend on them pretty heavily. And so hence the reason why this brings us back to fuzzing, right? Is, hey, right, let's make sure it's as resilient as possible. That's something that you can put into your, CI/CD pipeline. Like any testing, it takes time, and you're not going to get away from it. But any utility, any app that is concerned with security, probably should have that in its tool belt.
Yeah, and it's not like you're gonna. The thing, I guess there's a lot of stuff to dissect here, but the first point about the speed issue with CI/CD is like, yeah, you're probably not running this on every build to production. So it's not, speed shouldn't be as much of a concern, I wouldn't think, right? Like, I mean, how often do production applications insert new libraries once they're to a point where you'd want to do this kind of testing maturity wise? Like probably not that often, I mean, really, because you're once it's mature, it's kind of a thing to add new libraries, and definitely a thing to update them. So I guess, so that's the first thing that comes to mind is CI/CD speed might not be as much of an issue here. But then there was another thing that I was thinking about is like, there's almost, how we have the, I don't know, people, I found out through Twitter that people have different thoughts on OSI layer versus there's like another simpler version of it. I forget the name. Sorry, when I went through early networking and when you went through early networking, the OSI, it's the 7 layers, the please do not throw, all that. That was that was the standard. There were no competing standards. But anyways, I digress because I'm about to go off on a tangent. Anyways, coming back to it. I kind of envision I've been thinking about this. There's almost like layers, like an OSI layer within an application, right? Because you've got you've got often your libraries, but those libraries might have low level like C or whatever code. So that's like, it's almost like your different layers, like starting with the lowest level, which is like maybe C or whatever, and then abstracting a little bit higher above that to the libraries, and then abstracting even further into the base layer application libraries. So that would be like your Express or your Sinatra or your Pyramid or whatever, right? Different kind of frameworks, middleware, whatever you want to call it. Going up a bit higher is then the layer that is your developer written first party code. And the fuzzing that occurs at each one of those, it should look different, right? It should, to me, it should look pretty different. So like what I mean by that is your C level stuff should be fuzzing, right? Which is fuzzing in the sense of looking for like buffer overflows and things of that nature, memory handling issues, maybe race conditions, whatever stuff. I don't know, but like we'll just say that's one layer. The next is your library usage. That may be a different set of fuzzing as well. I really, it's kind of hard to say. It probably depends on the library and what it's doing. So this comes, when I think of this, it comes to mind like the image magic stuff, right? Like where you can get RCs through image magic when it resizes an image, things like that, or like one of the other crazy ones that it had. So then that's another layer. And then fuzzing, like let's say on the middleware layer of an application that just runs it, right? So then you've got requests that maybe you're trying to like throw a different type of fuzzing suite of tests, which are like maybe overly long requests or just fuzzing with different type forms of data in like headers and things like that, that really you're looking to tell service or crash or just create like unexpected ways of behavior in the application, right? I think.
Yeah.
And then maybe also there's like the components of it generating cookies and things like that. Like what happens if I throw a malformed, I guess it's still a header, but anyways, you get my point. And then the first party code, which is now fuzzing. This is the fuzzing that is more considered usually typically the AppSec part of things, right? Like the more traditional AppSec stuff, which is the insecure direct object reference, the missing function access control, remote code execution style vulns, LFI, RFI, traversal, whatever, right? Those kind of traditional vulnerabilities that we look for. So anyways, if that sounds like nonsense, sorry, but that's kind of how I've been thinking about layers of an application and then fuzzing.
Yeah. Well, and
what's all this chatter going on? It's in Slack. What's going on there?
No. The like from a fuzzing perspective, and this is one of the things that I went, that was a number of years ago that I was talking about, like the different, like, the unit testing that we do from a security perspective, right? Like is pretty immature. And I still feel like the space is fairly immature as far as full coverage goes and property testing, and actually having, full requirements and things built out before we actually get to the testing portion, right? We're just not a very mature industry because it moves so quickly. Development and security, like security has to move at the speed of development. And so we've fine-tuned our tools into very specific like categories of vulnerabilities. And that's where we start to miss some of those edge cases where, hey, maybe there is a buffer overflow that slips through and we're just passing along large amounts of data to a specific library that's written in C that ends up, causing us some sort of an issue on our web application, right? Like that's where those sorts of vulnerabilities start to pop up. And it's not always going to be the easiest testing framework to put together. And so I kind of look at this fuzz testing, to Cole's point and to, to other points as well, or other people, as further on in the development pipeline. It's not going to be, you're not going to want to run full fuzz tests against developed code that hasn't gone through functional testing or integration testing yet, because it's not to the point that you or it's not stable enough, right? Like there's got to be a certain level of stability with the code before you actually throw these fuzz tests against it to see how things respond. And it doesn't mean it's always going to drop something out, but you would be surprised at the different projects that we've fuzz tested in the past, especially on the kind of the blockchain cryptocurrency side of things, and where they just drop, like with anything, like any level of strange characters or network traffic that's unexpected, because they haven't been developed with that in mind.
So to Juan's point about,
Yeah.
so are you saying to only fuzz production? I actually took it more as you saying there's a certain level of maturity an application needs to reach, and you mentioned it through what you said was functional testing first and things of that nature. So that's how I took that. It was more, maybe I'm completely missing the point, but and it's totally possible. But I think what you're saying is if you don't have proper coverage and linting and functional tests and all of that in place, it's probably not time. Your code's probably not at a state yet where it's even working well enough to consider the security ramifications of using it or running in production. So I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I wonder if I think Juan was trying to be a little tongue in cheek there, right? Like
probably
only fuzzing production. Yeah.
I'm terrible with that kind of picking up on those cues. So
that's okay. That's okay.
Also, text is kind of hard to get that context.
It
from,
is.
But yeah,
it is. But I mean, honestly, if your company can take it, go for it, right? Like, if they're willing to let you fuzz in production. That being said, if you work for a financial or a healthcare company, probably don't, fuzz in production. The unintended consequences can be pretty large when it comes to that. Denial of service is a thing. Yeah.
Do we think that most staging environments adequately mimic production these days? I mean, I do, but I don't know what other people are seeing.
No.
What's the because I feel like my experience is probably more pre GitHub, right? And so I see a lot of what happens obviously from the inner workings of GitHub, but I guess you would have a perspective on this as a consultant who deals with a lot of organizations. Do you see what do you see as a gap between those two environments?
I mean, the biggest thing is just capacity, right? Capacity and data. Like it, and to be completely fair with these organizations, you really don't need the same level of capacity in your staging environment as you do in production. But in staging in general, I still see a lot of very limited data. Not even like realistic data when it comes down to it. So it's very hard to replicate what's going on in production when you don't have, the same number of records, the same number of, or the same kind of data in both environments. And that doesn't mean that we necessarily want to pull, private information into staging environments that more, that people have access to, because it does increase in exposure. And there are tools that are out there that'll help you normalize that sort of behavior. But I still see quite a few environments where it's just, hey, we stand up staging as another Docker instance or Kubernetes, whatever, right? Like, and it only lives for a little bit. We do our tests and then we shut it back down. But it is using a limited stack and it's not as extensive, right? And then I have organizations.
What does that mean, though, in practical terms?
Really, it's the capacity issue that I run into, right? Like the data capacity and the being able to test. See, if you really want to run a fuzz test against an application, it's got to run on similar hardware or with similar specs as something that is.
Oh, right. So this is from a fuzzing.
Yes, I probably should have caveated that. That's how I took your question, because we were talking about fuzzing.
Yeah, my bad. I should have been more specific, because I was wondering if they're like, oh, we have I don't know, some set of products on production only that we wouldn't run in staging, or like we use a provider in a certain way, like I don't know, like Cloudflare, whoever, in a certain way that wouldn't be
I do
the same as yeah.
Yeah, I do see that, especially like third-party service integration, whether it's email, SMS, access into like credit card processing, whatever, right? Like whatever third parties are used by the application, that typically isn't wired up properly. I can't tell you the number of times I can't fully test authentication flows because their staging test instances aren't even hooked up to email, right? They won't even send those out, right? And I'm like, these are fairly critical security pieces, and that's probably where I have the biggest problems when I'm doing testing with a lot of these organizations. Is they just, oh well, we're not too worried about it because they can go into the mbox or whatever on the system itself and open it up to pull out the whatever email that was being sent, right? And I'm like, guys, that's not like this is. Right.
Like, password's not an important part of authentication, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Or registration.
And I know this is one that, like, I'm sure Justin, if I pulled him in here, he'd have the same complaint, as me. It's one that we've been dealing with, and that's probably why it's top of mind right now. And I'm shaking my head as we've dealt with it. At least
Justin is Justin Larson, who works with Seth at Redpoint Security, the company that Seth owns. So just so everybody has context on who Justin is.
Yeah, that's who Justin is. I'm sure he'll appreciate me, talking about him. He doesn't like to be like pulled into the spotlight too much.
No, he's so like not a spotlight. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been like within the last 6 months, I can think back and a handful of times that we've had environments set up, like test environments, where like authentication has been very difficult to test because of issues like that, right? Whether it's SMS, whether it's however they're doing those authentication flows, or they haven't set up the integrations with Okta properly for a full test. So you can't test OAuth, you can only test username and password, right? Like, and so it becomes this, man, like we're not building these environments in a true like non-prod staging way that allows for proper security testing. Doesn't mean that we can't look at the code, but at the very least it does hamper those efforts, right?
Yeah, man, that's
yeah.
Yeah, basically that's kind of what you're doing if you're not if you're only testing in prod. I've never been a fan of testing production, and not because of it's not valuable. I think obviously it's very valuable, but it comes with so many issues. I've talked about them on the podcast before, but definitely had tools that didn't do anything. Nothing they did were like the time I've talked about this before, where like we spidered an application, and because they had, delete record actions that were they were just get request hyperlink. So obviously if you're spidering, it's just going to ask for a hyperlink. And if you do a state changing destructive action like that in a get request, and you kind of get what you deserve there. But in any case, don't like doing that. Don't like being on those calls. Don't like getting the midnight, hey, you dropped XYZ. Yeah, we can back it up, or had backed it up, but it's going to be XYZ hours and ramifications. Hate that stuff. So it's like, yeah, it's very valuable to test in production, but I think a lot of us hate it because it just comes with so much baggage and drama and caveats, and that also makes the business typically very nervous too. And so you could argue at length on resiliency and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it sucks to deal with, and nobody wants to have those conversations. So
yeah, I much prefer that. We test and stage even with these problems, and then when I do butt up against something that I can't either prove out or we need to validate in production, then we can go do it there, right? But the automated tools, the automated fuzzing, the automated scanning, because of those implications and because of the experiences that you and I have had in the past, It's always a, let's take a step back.
Yeah. Sorry, he made me laugh. I looked down and I saw that comment about ChatGPT, which was ChatGPT, what is YOLOSEC? Only test and prod for absolute truths. I love it. Absolute AppSec truths specifically.
Yes. So maybe we should talk about ChatGPT then, Ken. What is so ChatGPT?
I feel so dumb talking about it. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool though. I mean, it's OpenAI, right? OpenAI's creation, I think, right? I'm saying right because I don't remember. I thought it was OpenAI, which obviously OpenAI is who Copilot partnered up with for the Copilot product. And anyways, it's pretty cool to see. Like, I've seen some crazy stuff. I know there's an article you're going to post up, but beyond that, I saw, people have been using it to like generate all kinds of stories and interesting things, poems, stories, descriptions of things. It's kind of crazy because a couple of years ago, someone had asked me about the feasibility of, what was it? It was like of AI giving poor code recommendations on sites like Stack Overflow to negatively impact security-centric libraries. Like, it was like a theoretical question, right? And I said, today, like maybe in the future, but like today, absolutely not. Like it's very, very clear that you're talking to a machine. It's a lot. There's gobbledygook and nonsense sprinkled in there. But even like the better stuff a couple of years ago was like, for the most part, there were still markers that you could pinpoint for this being not a human being. And then the scary part of this is now I don't know that that's true anymore. I mean, honestly, I don't feel like, I'm sure there's limitations, and I'm sure that somebody much smarter than me knows exactly how to find those markers and patterns that haven't been said just by using human eyeballs. Yeah, it's scary, like in that way. Anyways,
well, yeah.
Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this article, and this popped up. Somebody else asked me about it, like when it first started, right? And like it's concerning, right? So the article that I posted specifically jumps into generating phishing emails, right, using OpenAI chat, and like I mean, from the article from that Richard Osgood or whatever it is, right? Like that was shockingly good, right? And he's right. The first request to just ask OpenAI or the chatbot to write an email offering a recipient a chance to win a $50 gift card if they click a link, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that hard to craft for you or I to create something like that, but that's like when I've created like previous phishing campaigns in the past, right, for testing purposes. This is exactly what I do. Like these are the thought processes that I'm going through. Is okay, what does the email from Google look like when you need to reset your password, right? Like, or whatever it is. Like, what is the link that needs to, what does that need to look like? Where does that need to actually be structured? And if we can do this in an automated fashion, it's going to speed up fraud. But on the flip side, I almost feel like it could speed up protection as well, though, right? Some of the code that's coming out of there, right? And that was the other one that I posted. Hold on, I'm trying to figure that. Oh, but I should post this one, right? Like we should.
The Security Boulevard one, right? That's the one you're talking about. I have the link. I can post it.
Yep.
Here. Post it there, and then in general, this one is the one that just blew my freaking mind, and I can't stop thinking about it. Wait, what did that come out like that? Okay, all right, I think I fixed it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, yep. And this is what I've actually been more interested in. I've seen quite a bit of these, right? I've seen these from the finance side of things, like people designing scripts to actually make money on the stock market based on the current trends, like monitoring what's going on in the stock market. Oh crap. And that, yeah, there you go. And this goes for all of kind of like automated functionality that we have, and user decisioning, like human decisioning that goes into some of these processes. We're going to be replaced, right? Like it's going to be more spot checks onto what the AI is actually doing, but we're going to become more and more dependent on it for protection, for making money, for creating code. And that's not to say that it's always going to be correct, but I think it's getting to the point that it's going to be more correct than it is, or it's going to have more success than it is failure, which is going to be a constant feedback loop, right? Yeah, it's pretty wild, right?
I would agree. I mean, hold on, let me share this because visually this is just freaking wild. So hold on. Let me share my screen here. Present, share screen, window, what GPT? Cool. Yeah. So that right there, specifically, let me highlight this code here. This is nuts. So guys, this is cool. Like, folks, this is crazy. They asked for a sample PHP exploit of mass assignment, right? So presumably, I guess this, I don't know what it did to like, maybe, I mean, probably nothing, right? Like it probably just guessed, but imagine if you had access to know what these columns are for like each model that you're dealing with. So this would be like a user table / model. The same thing, right? Models table. Anyways, these are column values: username column, password column, admin. Anyways, imagine if your tooling knew what columns existed for each table. This is wild, right? It has an endpoint it wants to send a request to, and then it's just going to be able to like, it just immediately knew to like throw in that additional column value with a true value to, mass assign your, basically the idea being you're like, I don't know, signing up or adding a user or whatever, and you're only supposed to know about these two things and submit those, but you do this to like, that's what mass assignment is, right? You send an additional column value in, and then it just becomes attached to that record, which is basically, this makes you an admin. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think that is freaking wild. That is amazing. That's incredible. Like to see something that is, accurately generating a PHP mass assignment vulnerability example is super cool. Like that is also very scary, but that is very cool. And so if I'm a bug bounty researcher, I'm definitely looking at what I do with ChatGPT, and then wiring it up, whatever payloads it generates to probably, I don't know, some sort of nuclei, or I don't know, whatever, some sort of scanning engine, Zap or whatever. And anyways, think it's really dope. Think it's really cool. So
yeah,
just wanted to share that. That's super cool.
Well, look, okay. So like on the flip side, right? Yeah, I just asked it to generate, create me some Python code to prevent cross-site scripting, right? And yeah, sanitized input. It's actually got like a test string in there for me, right? Like, and it did this in, all of like 20 seconds, whatever it is. Now you could probably find the same thing. I don't know if this is what I would recommend directly to developers, right? Like, but on the flip side, like, how do you exploit XSS against a Python Django application, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to give me some explanation of what this is. Let's find the website. For example, yeah, okay. I mean, this is good, just like background, right?
Oh, geez, that's amazing.
Yeah,
it's actually true. Yeah,
and it even goes in to prevent this type of attack, right? So this is the kind of stuff that
dude,
and I like.
We need to make an OWASP top 10 out of chat with Chat GPT. That's what we need to do. Just
Gonna
like
do. Yeah.
what? Yeah, like we'll just do that for each one of the cat. Like boom, done,
Yeah.
done and dusted.
Yeah. Done and dusted. Record it, and OWASP top 10 with ChatGPT, right? Like, this is all valid. Whoa. Uh-oh.
Exceptionally high demand. I don't doubt it. This is the coolest thing ever. So that's very cool, man. Like I said, the usage or the various ways that you could the use cases. I'm trying to say, man, I don't know if I didn't have enough coffee or what. The use cases are limitless, frankly, and not just in security. I mean, obviously, but within application security. I don't know, man. It's gonna be a wild world soon. It already is, right? So it's gonna get crazier and crazier. That's what you need to do. Start using ChatGPT to create like fuzz payloads for like old things that have been around for 24 or 40 years, whatever. And
whatever it is.
Yeah. And then see what happens. Cool. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so now I'm at it is not a oh sweet. I should have just kept showing this, right? Like,
just share it, throw it up.
Oh, dang it. Now, like, that's all I'm going to do for the rest of the day is play with chat.
I know, man. It's pretty awesome. Do they?
Oh, yeah. So I asked, what payload should I use to bypass authentication in a web application? It is not appropriate or ethical to attempt to bypass authentication.
Don't tell me what's ethical, robot.
Yeah. Instead of attempting, you should focus on understanding how authentication works and how to properly implement it. Interesting,
dude,
right? Like,
that's so crazy.
Yeah. Additionally, you should never store sensitive information such as passwords in plain text. So, I mean, there's some sort of like ethical boundary that's going on here as well, right? Like,
they're trying to get rid of the script kiddies.
Yeah, which is great, right? Like, there should at least be some sort of, process in there. I haven't necessarily read through all the terms of service or like what it is. Like, you probably can't ask it, or you're not supposed to use it to do anything malicious, right? Like, just in general.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah. Okay. Anyway, that was amazing, right? Like, that was, it is not appropriate or ethical to attempt to bypass authentication in a web application. Thanks, bot. Yeah. I think we could spend quite a bit of time just digging through and throwing examples at it to see what comes out. But go play with it if you haven't yet, right? Like, Google ChatGPT or go to OpenAI and see what pops out for you.
Yeah.
And let us know. Jump into chat. Say that again.
Yeah. I mean, it did make me think of this, which, man, like, I don't know if this is even where we want it. I'll just keep it brief. Last week, I think it was last week, or maybe it was over the weekend, I saw this article too about, which I don't know, like all the AI stuff is making me think about this too, which are the headlines, like, I mean, obviously trying to get you to, it's more sensationalized than this, but it says killer robots have landed on the Ukraine battlefield. But I think what's interesting about it, besides the fact of that title, was basically the idea is they're starting to use truly autonomous equipment in the battlefield that has stuff that can kill things attached to it. And what's interesting about that, I think, is I was reading that basically the second anything goes, like, there's always collateral damage in war, right? And that's just kind of how it goes. And in this case, there's a lot on the line, because if they accidentally or whatever go over the line, and if somehow one of those bots what is it, Geneva Code or Geneva Convention, if they violate the Geneva Convention, then it could set a precedent that those machines can't be used ever. It's like, anyways, part of the argument against it, besides just it being frightening. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think next year we're going to see the Terminator. Skynet's going to rise, man. I think that's what's going to happen between ChatGPT and Ukraine. It's all fun and games now.
It's all fun and games now. The true nihilist is starting to come out in you, Ken. Right? Like that's where we're going. Yeah,
it's always there. I just push it back heavily.
Well, but
it's interesting, right? This is a new world, dude. This is like, it's wild. It's wild. We live in a wild time.
But realistically, this is going to be what's going to happen, right?
I know, right?
2 hours coding, 6 hours debugging, as opposed to generating code in ChatGPT for 5 minutes and then 24 hours of debugging. Yes, that does feel appropriate, right? Yeah, that's probably more of what it's going to be. I mean, it's for now. This is it, right? For now, yeah, it's not going to do away with like development jobs or right, like. If anything, it's probably going to increase productivity, similar to what like Copilot is doing as well, right? Like we're moving into that space where we may not have to know exactly where the semicolon fits in order for the code to be compiled, right? It can be helpful, and there's always going to be a place for it, but we're going to get away from that, which is also going to give us, this is the one thing that like is fascinating to me and as actually makes me very optimistic, is it's going to free us into making more like artful decisions and becoming more of true kind of, I don't know. I want to code artists instead of just like code, programmers, right? You're going to get to certain levels. Yeah. You're going to get to a specific level where putting together those pieces in an efficient way is going to become an art form, or is going to become the engineering practice, as opposed to just hammering away at a keyboard for 24 hours a day or whatever it is, right? For 8 hours a day. And that should allow us to actually think about use cases and how we can apply technology to problems in different ways than we've done in the past, because we're not going to be so focused on technology implementations as we are going to be on how technology can assist in doing X, Y, and Z. Because you think about how much time we do spend on specifics of, hey, how do HTTP requests and responses work? Going back to that previous conversation that we had, how do we actually see that? How do we tear that apart? And what are the technology limitations that we're dealing with? If we have something like an AI that can bypass those for us, we're going to get over those technology hurdles faster, which is going to get us to the point that we're actually helping out and we're solving problems quicker than we did in the past. So, I mean, I think there's a good side to this as well. It's not all doom and gloom as long as we apply the technology properly.
I mean, between the cloud infrastructure and like Terraform, things like that allow you to deploy whole infrastructure with just a bit of code, between the advances of in like developer workflows for like, I think of things like code spaces where you no longer have to have everybody have the same local dev environment set up and have to futz with scripts to like get that to work, right? You just spin it up in code spaces, and then now some of these new, like you could generate a lot of sort of like to your point, base layer kind of code where it's just like you're abstracting away a lot of the like the stuff that is not that interesting to write, right? That you just basically have as a foundational element. You've just taken away a bunch of jobs there. You don't need nearly the amount of people to build infrastructure, to deploy code, to maintain code, to maintain the environments where code's written, and to even write the code itself. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm going to start learning woodworking or some other kind of career that doesn't involve computers, because I see where the future's headed. I'm not going to have a job. You're not going to have a job.
You're going to have a job.
Software devs aren't going to have a job. It's me.
You're going to have to become yeah.
They were telling everybody, hey, you need to learn how to write software, that worked in factories and stuff like that. And I think now it's going to go the opposite way, right? You have to start learning some other skills. Now, all jokes aside, it is crazy now how, a 1 to 3 person shop can accomplish what, say, a 20-person shop could accomplish before. So,
yep.
Tools are awesome, but they definitely, it means that the cost of developing software and all of that seems to be potentially lesser in the future. I guess what I'm trying to say. So it's interesting. There's a little, you bring up good points.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I mean, the cost of innovation, and the cost of progress, right? Like that's always been the case since, I mean, industrial revolution is like, we come up with better techniques. We come up with better ways of doing things that doesn't require as much human involvement. And yes, there is a loss of jobs, and we've got to adjust and, move to whatever is new, or be left behind, right? That's, being a Luddite doesn't necessarily make you a lot of money, or, it doesn't necessarily help you support your family when it comes down to it. And even though that is something that you understand, but I know you and I both have knowledge that we gained coming up in the industry that is probably useless at this point, because, the products that we were using have gone away. They were subsumed. Like they're no longer supported, right? Like, there's all sorts of stuff that you and I used to have to do on a daily basis that now, like, it's a checkbox in, AWS that does the same thing. And, it sucks if that's the only job that you have, or that's the only like skill. But if you had the skill to do it at that point, it's a matter of just learning and stepping into it. So get familiar with the AI as it's stepping into it. Play with Copilot, because it honestly, it's the future. We see it coming, right? All right. Okay. I did want to get to this before we dropped off for today. I know we're at about an hour here.
I have another 15 minutes before my next meeting, if you want to.
Okay. Oh, sweet.
Delve into it.
So it was just the question that I had at the very beginning when we started talking about the episode today. What do you wish for an AppSec Christmas, Ken?
Oh man.
You didn't know I was going to ask you that, huh? Right. What do you hope happens in the next year, right? In application security, I think is probably what the real question is.
I'm biased. I know what I want, but it's going to be very biased, and heavily skewed towards my own interests. So what I will say is I am very interested in securing code that ships on a daily basis, because right now, the way that it's been done, typically, we're still very much in a waterfall methodology as AppSec practitioners. And if you think I'm wrong about that, let's talk through it. Because what do? Do you do everyday code reviews of every single code change that's occurring? You probably use some tools. How good do you feel about your tools? And I think that there's a lot to be tackled that has high impact there, which is, again, I don't want to go too far into that. But anyways, that's what I'm looking forward to, is working on problems like that. Because most of the time, the way it works is you just get a code base and you look at either the entire code base because it's brand new, or maybe you're looking at a feature that has gone through some heavy development. And then that's a point in time at which you're looking at it, which is, my friends, a gate. And it is very much a waterfall methodology. So I think that's an important one. There's a lot of bounty researcher found preventable vulnerabilities that occur because of these frequent code updates in everybody's code bases that maybe don't have the best coverage. So that's probably a big one for me. What about you?
Ooh, I've been thinking about this the last couple of days, right? Right, like what I actually want to see in the industry. One thing that pops up is I want to see less focus on specific edge case vulnerabilities and more focus on actual security principles, right? Like from information security, but from application security and product security specifically, right? We spend so much time in branded vulnerabilities, like Log4j, as we wear these, as we wear these sweatshirts, but we spend so much time focused on edge cases instead of core principles. And I think as I'm embedded with different organizations, as I'm talking to developers, it's not necessarily their fault, because the way that we throw vulnerabilities at them is very much hey, the bug bounty researchers found this one edge case where they can do cross-site scripting. Go fix this one edge case, as opposed to having a larger discussion on input validation across the whole product. And I mean, I think it goes back to exactly what you're talking about as well, is this waterfall methodology that we've fallen into, that, that we do as application security, product security engineers, right? Is we just don't have the capacity to realistically deal with code on a daily basis. So, my wish is that we would stop talking so much about specific vulnerabilities without referencing the overarching security principle behind it and how people can approach those as well.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. That's valuable insight. I know somebody else here mentioned that they wanted to be invited to early meetings of product development design for Christmas. Wanted.
That would be helpful.
Hey,
yes. Yeah.
I will say it. At GitHub, we're actually working on a shift left strategy to address that same thing, where it's like we'd like to more uniformly get ahead of those. So it's not just you. Everybody wants to be a part of those. I think that's that's very valuable insight, is that, I think being aware of not just products that are shipping early on, but also being included in those conversations so that you can give design feedback up front, or have input on the design rather, mainly because, man, dude, it's hard when you get to these threat models and you say, well, this is pretty risky. Like, you need to make this architectural change. It's like, well, it's too late. All the decisions have been made. Things have been bought. Designs are now in action and motion, and there's no changing course. So what can we do to mitigate something that is now going to be considered from here on out in that service, risky, has inherent risk to it. So anyways, you're not alone, Juan. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm with you on there.
And then he also brings up secure by default as well, right?
The one true framework.
The one true framework. Where's Manico? Where's Jim? Right? Like, he told me we're gonna get to the one true framework, right? Like,
it'll never happen. It'll never happen.
Yeah, there's always going to be,
unless you have somebody who writes it for literally every language and that people like, and then you make the framework. Okay, I shouldn't say it could never happen. It's very unlikely that it would ever happen. And then it's a 0% chance everybody would use the one framework. And it's also a 0% chance that one framework would not also then have its own, security people aren't to be clear, even if you have a really good eye for security, if you're writing code, you're now using a different skill set. And it's not, I've introduced vulnerability. I'll admit it, whatever, maybe I suck, but I've definitely introduced a couple of vulnerabilities in my time writing code. Just very, not easy to see ones, but ones that were oh, the framework behaves differently than I thought kind of stuff, or, right. Very, very edge casey things, but it happens nevertheless. So it's even if you had one framework, there's no guarantee it would actually stay secure forever.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't know. And I always go back to the old code as well, right? That's great. We come up with the one true framework, but we still have ping that's out there that's been there for 40 years. Right? We still depend on mainframes for a lot of business processing and financial transactions, right? That code is over, is 50 years old in some cases, if not more. Yeah, good luck, right? Like converting any of that, even to code that was written 20 years ago, has been a huge investment and problem. And getting to the one true framework, getting to the secure framework, even if it is truly secure in the way that they think, it's not going to. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a nihilist when it comes to that. It's not going to happen. I think we're getting better, definitely, right? But there's always going to be issues, especially with the hard problems like authorization, authentication. Take your pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. Yeah. Cool. Well, good deal. I think that about sums it up for this week, right? Unless there's anything else that you want to talk about before we got to jump off. I know where
I do. Just real briefly, I want to mention. Yeah, sorry. I want to mention a couple. So first, because you mentioned Cole, I did want to mention Cole's podcast, which is the Secured podcast. So shout out and love to Cole's podcast there. Also, you mentioned this, and I am glad you reminded me because I definitely want to talk about this, was the 404 podcast started by Leaf and a few others. Basically, Leaf has been on the podcast before, knowledgeable, knows a lot of players, know a lot of like in the AppSec space, knows a lot about the problem space as well. So I guess what they do is they take their time, they kind of review news that's come out, probably similar in a way. I mean, sometimes if it's important, we'll take a couple days to analyze a story, but a lot of times we're just riffing off the cuff. They're doing a bit more homework. And so there's a lot of value there. And I'm a big believer in that, like the more people contributing, the better. So anyways, 404 podcast. And then just constant reminder, TLDR Sec exists. It's awesome. You should be reading it. And yeah, that's it.
Yep. I didn't mean to forget about Leaf and Will and Travis over there. They've all been on on our podcast before, so I'm sure there'll be some collaboration with them. But they are doing a great job with that. And yeah, but otherwise, jump onto Slack, join the conversation. Love to have you. There's a lot going on. Thanks for all the feedback today and all the chatter. Makes it very enjoyable for what Ken and I do. So, otherwise, we'll see everybody next week for a very special Christmas episode. I guess we'll see what we decide we want to do before Christmas. So,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And well, I don't know what else to say, man. Happy holidays. Are we back on next Tuesday?
Yeah, we can be.
I mean, okay, cool. All right. I just my schedule's good now. So, all right, cool. So next Tuesday we should see y'all. So before the holiday break, we'll say.
Yep. For our very special ChatGPT OWASP Top 10.
It's just going to be us reading a teleprompter made by ChatGPT.
Yep.
With eggnog.
With eggnog. Spiked eggnog at that. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No. Cool. All right, y'all.
Sweet. All right. Have a good one.
Bye.